back with a solo Q&A, and it was March the last time we did this for episode 310, and this time round we've got a big range of questions and some topics that I've not spoken about in a long time, so I'm excited to get into it. Question number one: what's an underrated habit that you think others could implement really quickly? One of the mantras that I live by is that you are what you consume, and what you consume is something I take very, very seriously, whether that's content like podcasts and books, whether it's music we listen to, the people we speak to, the TV we watch, the social media that we scroll on. It all soaks into our brains subconsciously, and it dictates our thoughts, our views, our attitude, and off the back of that, our results. With that in mind, you have to pick carefully. And I'm going to be able to speak more about this soon. Definitely not in this episode, unfortunately. But right now, I've made some big changes to what I'm consuming from an already pretty refined content diet, because I know at this moment in time, I need to be even more careful and selective with my energy, with my focus than probably ever before. And when the events that I've had have unfolded, I need to make sure that I'm primed in the best possible position to deal with that. So looking at the inputs that I've got, which of course then dictate the outputs that come after that. So this week, for example, earlier on, I got drawn into one of the scandals on X on Twitter about Epping and Canary Wharf. I was genuinely angry, and it was not helpful for me to be that way because it took up some of my bandwidth that I couldn't really afford to allocate. Now, it does matter on some level that I know the happenings in the country, but right now, I can't impact any of that other than attending some sort of protest against open borders or whatever comes up. So I've decided I'm not going to use X until at least the start of August. I'm going to take a full week and a bit off it. Music's another one I want to talk about because, and I said this in one of my birthday solos that I do every year, music dictates mood. And at this moment in time, upbeat house has been my choice, not just because I'm going to Ibiza in August, but I follow a creator called Rob the Bank, and he was speaking about songs or spells, the lyrics, but also the beats behind them. So I'm pretty much exclusively listening to 120 BPM house right now. And one of the last episodes many of you will listen to will be with Chris Burns, and he swears by Eric Pritz's Opus tracks. And I've been using that while writing my sales coaching slides, some of the modules and some of the presentations I've been doing. And having that on or listening to that in the morning, you do feel elevated, and you're not allowing yourself to get listening to sad songs or failed love stories or anything like that that kind of lowers your frequency. Who you speak to, I would also count within your content or your consumption diet. And I promise I will speak more about the last couple of weeks once we're more set on the outcomes from it and the next steps. But there was some really unexpected news which came my way, and I'm navigating it as well as a number of other people. And some of those other people have not handled it particularly well. They've been negative, moaning, stagnant, down, and really just low frequency. I won't really humor that because I'm not somebody that can stop and dwell. I've moved on from it, and I've taken positive action on my path forward. And instead of getting sucked into those conversations and those sort of negative looping chats that you have with somebody, I just acknowledge the messages that come in from them, but I won't contribute or add to it or get sucked into spending a lot of time on it. And I recommend that you do the same with anyone that's in a negative spiral, because spiral is the exact word. If you end up in that space, you end up out of control, you end up falling off your path, off your trajectory. So the underrated habit that I would recommend for anyone right at the start of this podcast is quickly implement a tighter content consumption for your music, for your podcast, for your book, for your TV that you watch, and even the conversations that you have. And that will massively shape the inputs that go in and then the outputs that come off the back of it. Question 2. What's been the biggest mindset shift you've had with money? I was personally brought up to save, never take on debt, and live frugally. Now I have a buy-to-let mortgage and I'm leveraging money as a tool. So that's obviously from somebody that's taken a shift in how they view money and is now more willing to take positive risk or risk that feels worth it for them. And I was also brought up to save, which I definitely think is healthy. Money management was a big theme in my household from mum and dad. And that does, however, mean that it limits your mindset around investing, or you could call that speculating to accumulate. For example, my dad owns his own business as a consultant, and he's a clued up guy. He's somebody I look to for advice about a lot of things, but he's never invested in the stock market. He's never invested in property or whiskey, let alone in crypto like me. So I broke that mold, and my brother and I were the first people in our family to ever really invest in something that isn't just a cash ISA or a savings account. And that came from consuming content on the topics through books and podcasts. Guys like Andrew Craig were instrumental in me understanding the power of being growth minded, understanding compounding, and also appreciating the nature of inflation, the erosion and debasement of our currency. Beyond investing, I think being around people who were earning bigger money in their business or their career opened my eyes to what was possible. And a lot of that was interviewing successful people on the podcast who were in a wide range of different industries and had scaled to figures that I'd never really been aware of being possible before. And I think when you realize that a milestone like 6 figures is completely possible from people of all backgrounds and in so many different industries and sectors, it set a level of expectation of what I could personally achieve. And the whole phrase that I've said on the podcast many times is, if not me, then who? Or for you guys, if not you, then who? That's relevant here because I want you to consider what you're capable of. Look at the individuals who have had relative success in whatever field that's in, and ask if you can do the same. If you apply yourself fully with the right behaviors, habits, routines, and of course, you're in the right vehicle and the right type of business and the right type of sector to do so. I personally looked around and thought, I can do this. And that's not being disparaging of any guest that I've had on the show, but if people I speak to that I have access to that can come on a show like this one can achieve what they've achieved, then so can I and so can you listening to this. So that's definitely been my biggest mindset shift around around money. Willingness to invest in compound and grow, albeit with the risks that's associated with that. And then secondly, knowing that I too am capable of scaling my income to levels that I didn't previously ever think about. And your environment and who you look up to and who you spend time with raises that for you.
These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything and all your problems. Before you jump on the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering the foundations and basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, movement are the real keys. When you do decide to supplement, however, what you choose really does matter. You know I'm a big fan of removing toxins and unnecessary things from your lifestyle, and I ensure that my supplements are free from additives, artificial flavors, and any unnecessary, dirty, toxic fillers. Personally, having seen many professional athletes and top performers utilize their products, I decided to give Pure Sport supplements a go. Their products are built on science-backed information, minimal ingredients, and they do exactly what they're meant to. Whether it's their best-selling ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, their deep magnesium to support with quality sleep, or even their natural testosterone-boosting Tonka Ali, I trust that what they make is developed to care for me and my body. Explore the full range of Pure Sport supplements at the link in the show notes, puresport.co, and use the code CAMBRO10 for 10% off.
Question 3, I get feedback from my sales manager at work that I'm too fast to pitch our solution. Have you ever found that? It's very common as a sales guy to rush into your pitch before you qualify a prospect. By qualify, I mean understand their needs, their problems, their goals and what they want to achieve, their expectations from your product or service, their requirements in terms of timelines, the result and the after impact they're hoping for, and even their price or budgetary expectations. And I've got a set of questions that I use for any discovery call called Let's Questions, which allow me to ask more questions in the earlier part of the meeting rather than rushing straight into presenting solutions or products. And however, Let's Questions is like a framework you can have, but you can also have other things that I would call a mental anchor that reinforce the types of behaviors that you want. So one could simply be 2 ears, one mouth. And that encourages you to listen more than you talk. And a good rule of thumb is that you want to listen to your prospect more than you speak during the meeting. And I guess another mental anchor that can be quite helpful, particularly if you're somebody that's prone to rushing into presenting your solution, is discover 3 problems or 3 areas your prospect wants to work on before you present any solution. Even if after that first problem they unveil, you can immediately match it to solution, keep digging for a little bit more so that you can cover more when it comes to presenting. And I think if you combine these tools like Let's Questions, like 2 ears, one mouth, like discover 3 problems before you present a solution, you're going to give your potential client a lot more time to share what they care about and what's important to them. And then you can come in with the type of help that you've got. If you've not already, then make sure you go back and listen to episode 257 and episode 319, because those were more focused on sales lessons that I've shared off the back of doing a combined 2.8 million in the last 2 years. Question number 4. Do you have a hidden talent hobby that not many people know about? I don't know about talent, but some listeners will know and some won't that I'm a keen golfer. I'm definitely not a top player, but I do have a single figure handicap of 9. And it's definitely something that I spend time and energy on. So that's something I do away from kind of podcast pro, sales guy, fitness activities. Other hobbies and interests, I'm not sure. And again, phrases that people will be laughing they've heard so many times from me, but I like to go narrow and deep, not wide and shallow. And that often does mean that the things that I try to do really well. And that means I don't do tons and tons of random things outside of that. So most of the things that I allocate my time to, I do lots and lots, whereas I don't necessarily have loads of like random hobbies or interests sitting in the background, which maybe makes me not a particularly interesting person, but perhaps you're tuned into a solo Q&A for other interesting insights, so I'll try and bring those. Question 5, are you open to constructive criticism? Absolutely, and I think it's something that I've been quite good at, with one caveat: as long as it comes from someone who has the right intent or the right credentials sat behind it. As in, I definitely have felt affronted or pissed off or annoyed before if somebody gives me advice that you just can't take seriously based on their current circumstances and their current outcomes. And you can insert the classic podcast trope of you wouldn't take fitness advice from a fat PT or you wouldn't take financial advice from a broke financial advisor. I take experts seriously based on their achievements with themselves and their clients. And I would add to that people who genuinely care about your outcomes that come off the back of the advice they give, and if they're well-meaning and their caring comments and suggestions come from the right place. And if I think about constructive criticism on the podcast, for example, I've taken advice from the likes of Chris Williamson, I've taken advice from other hosts I look up to who are, of course, experts in their field. But on the flip side, I also take advice and suggestions from people who listen to the show who actually genuinely care about the positive direction of the travel of it. And they're definitely not experts in creating a podcast or launching a podcast, but they certainly have the best interests of it at heart. They want it to grow. They want it to get better. So I would take that sort of advice and criticism on board on guest choice or my presenting, the audio and video quality, the delivery of it, the structure of it. These are all things that I would, of course, look to somebody who's got a podcast to tell me about. But I would also take seriously the supportive listeners that I've got when they give that. And I think a useful filter for constructive criticism is the man in the arena. Are they somebody that is actually involved in this space that you can take seriously? Alongside, of course, is it somebody that's well-meaning, that has good intentions with the comments they're making? Outside of that, probably not going to listen to them. Question 6. Do you believe an introvert can be good at sales, or does it take a certain type of personality, like a more extroverted person? I think anyone with the right skill set and application can be a good salesperson, and that's not limited to your predisposition when it comes to extroversion versus introversion. And while extroversion can predispose you to being better and being more willing to be out there communicating, prospecting, and meeting new people, it's definitely not the underlying driver of sales success. Things like charm and chat are what a lot of people associate with good salespeople. But beyond that, and I've worked with many people who would probably consider themselves introverted, they've had really good intent, they've had great adherence to a process, they've been really thorough in their preparation, they've been diligent, and they've had the ability to improve on things. Those are bigger levers to pull for sales success than necessarily being somebody that just really likes talking to people or being around people. And introverts can achieve all of those different things when it comes to intent, when it comes to process, when it comes to preparation, when it comes to diligence. Those abilities are something I would put more stock in than necessarily being like, I'm really good at talking to people or I really like meeting new people. That's helpful, but it's not foundational. Question number 7. What does success look like to you? I think that's constantly moving in terms of what the different metrics are and what field that's in. But overall, what I would say is living with discipline, having structure, being purposeful, and the activities that I'm doing being in alignment with my values. as well as having relative freedom to do the things that I want to do within my day, within my week, within my month, within my year, while also helping the people that I care about around me to do the same and have that relative freedom. That for me is a successful life. And there's loads of metrics and loads of different measurements we can put within that. But on the whole, having those core values and core things in place would be success for me. Question number 8. We always want to talk about relocation. So US or UAE relocation, which would be better for your sales coaching business and your podcast? Both the UAE and the US would be good arenas to be successful in. So I don't think either are bad options. I would also say the US has 50 different states, so I suspect some will not stack up particularly well against Dubai, while others may be considerably better. Again, I've not visited the US ever before, so it's hard for me to comment other than what I see online and what I see other people doing with their relocations. Culturally right now, though, the UK is definitely a harder place to grow a business and perhaps even a podcast, but it can be done. I'm doing it. Other people have done it. There's no reason that can't be the case. And all bar 2 of my sales coaching clients have been based in the UK. One was based in Dubai. One was actually in Australia, so no Americans yet. And in terms of those 2 options when it comes to UAE versus America, I genuinely believe wherever I am, I can be a success. And I try and detach from where I'm located being a limiter. I think environment is important, but I have a genuinely good setup in Glasgow and where I stay. Macro factors like tax, growth-mindedness, aspiration, energy, they all mean there is going to be helpful or challenging factors wherever you're based, and some will be better than others. And I shared this quote when I spoke to Matt Haycox in the podcast earlier this year. He was talking about his first business going through a bankruptcy and him really struggling with that and then scaling his way back up. And we joked about how in the US that many people in business look at bankruptcy or business failure totally different to the UK. They actually don't see it as terrible, whereas in the UK we have this like going bankrupt is like fatal, or a business failing is fatal. And the quote that I brought up when I was talking to Matt might make you laugh. It was a quote from Chris Williamson. He was discussing the optimism and the encouragement that people in the US give you, and it being way, way higher. And people almost have first line of cocaine energy because they've got that let's go, come on attitude. That's definitely missing in the UK. But something that's really encouraged me, and maybe you're listening to this off the back of listening to me on the Scottish Property Podcast, where a lot of new listeners came across from. I was really positive on that show, and people were drawn towards that. And people who listen to a show like this one, listen to a show like the Scottish Property Podcast, listen to insert another self-development, mindset, investment, business podcast, we are our own little bubble of positive people that will allow you to grow your business or grow the ventures that you care about. And it's about finding those, regardless of whether that's harder to find in Scotland or the UK versus perhaps other places that are more entrepreneurial or are more willing to push you to try and grow. Question 9, and this is probably my least self-development answer of the day. Any specific golfing goals? I mentioned that I'm playing off a handicap of 9. I'm playing pretty well this year. We did really well at a recent event at Hilton Park, my brother and I, and I've got a couple of golf days coming up. One of them I'm actually playing and speaking at on the 22nd of August. That's for Scottish business owners, organised by Ryan O'Connor and Willie Dodd, which I'm really excited for. But golf is probably an area of my life where it's the antithesis to a lot of the other areas where I genuinely just play for enjoyment. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm annoyed or disappointed when I play poorly, but I genuinely turn up on a Saturday and a Sunday or on a midweek night when I get the time, and I just want to enjoy playing. Now, if I make some birdies, if I make some pars, amazing, but I don't play a lot of really competitive golf. I mostly play corporate days or works days, or I'm just playing social with my brother and friends, and not attaching too much of a metric towards that is quite helpful for me to switch off from the intensity of all the other things that I'm doing. So trying not to be too anal about, oh my goodness, I need to get my handicap to 7 or 6 or whatever it is something that is pretty helpful for me in the grand scheme of things. Okay, question 10. We, of course, had to get mildly political because that's the way these solo podcasts have gone for a while now. Thoughts on 16-year-olds being given the vote in the UK? First of all, we'll be upfront about my bias. I'm against it because if you're not old enough to buy alcohol or cigarettes or get a tattoo or serve in a jury, get a credit card, then I'm going to question whether you're able to be adult enough, and adult's the key term, to vote in shaping the democratic future of the country. I just don't understand where you can have this cutoff for all these different important potential life decisions and yet voting fall beneath that. And if I was to try and steelman the argument for 16-year-olds getting the vote, you could say that, for example, in Scotland, 16-year-olds can get married. That's a big decision. They can join the army. So that's huge decisions. And equally, many of the political decisions that will be made by the people who have been elected will impact their future. But at what point or at what stage do you cut that off? Because you could say, for example, that 13-year-olds in first year at secondary school will be impacted by the policy decisions of the education department. So should they be able to vote specifically on what happens within the education department in the country? Where on earth do you draw the line? Oh, 16-year-olds are going to be impacted by a referendum on Brexit or Scottish independence. Of course they are, but so are 13-year-olds, so are 14-year-olds. Where do we have this arbitrary cutoff for who should be allowed to vote and when? And for me, I think 18 is already young enough. Many of the people at 18 already lack real world experience to know what a sensible vote at the ballot box looks like. With voting, the genie is already out of the bottle, or maybe more fittingly, Pandora's box is already open. And if anything, if you look at our political culture, we probably need tighter rules on voting, whether that's by ID at the ballot box for starters, but you could even go further and say that 21 would be a better start point because most people by 21 have finished full-time education, so they've quote-unquote grown up in some regard. Or probably one of my more controversial takes is that I don't think it would be a bad idea for only those who pay tax to vote. So if you're not contributing to society through taxation, then perhaps you have no say whatsoever in the decision making and how people spend that budget that you're allocating towards them. And I think there's merit in having a parameter like that. And if you haven't held down a job or experienced tax and you're not sure the way of the world and how it looks and what it's like, then I'm not sure you're actually well placed to vote on how the country operates. And something that is important to note is that these policies of lowering the voting age are typically positioned by leftist parties like the SNP or like Labour, because young people are more likely to be socialist or left-leaning in their nature, just by nature of their perhaps lack of experience of the real world. And by Labour or SNP or whoever introducing younger voters, they're actually shoring up their voting base for now and into the future. And it's another reason that controversially, these parties typically favour mass immigration too, because economic migrants who intend to utilise the support of the state, their future children will be more likely to vote left because they'll allocate a bigger budget towards that. And I think people who paid attention to the US election saw that the Biden administration were looking to bus or move particular groups into swing states because that would position the Democrats to win now or into the future. And I'd be very worried at the government's approach to trying to shape the demographic of the election and the electorate and stack the deck in their favour for perhaps the election in a few years' time or elections well beyond that as well. Oh, question 11, time management and productivity. Let me grab a drink before I do this. Okay, what do you feel like you're... What do you do when you feel like you're not getting enough done? I think it's a perennial curse of somebody who wants to be a high achiever or an overachiever, that when you have high levels of ambition, you're going to feel like you're not getting enough done a lot of the time. And that's unfortunately just par for the course. That's just the nature of the game. But if I was to answer that question fully with something practical, you've got to be honest with yourself. And answer some potentially challenging questions. So the first question I would ask would be, am I doing what I should be doing to be successful in the field or the areas that I've said I want to be successful? Again, to hark back to a really popular episode recently with Chris Burns, he was speaking about, are you giving yourself a chance to be successful as a copywriter? So when he was speaking to guys, he was asking them, are you sending out enough proposals? Are you sending out enough cold emails? Are you iterating on your writing quality and your writing style? Are you integrating AI into your work processes to actually write better copy, not just write more copy? That's something you need to consider when it comes to, am I getting enough done? You need to think about, am I doing the things that will make me successful? And a follow-up question to that can be around, is this a volume or is this a quality issue? As in, you could be executing daily on things that really matter, or there could be loads of fluff work within your diary. And if you're busy redesigning your logo or trying to craft or script the perfect Instagram reel or the perfect carousel, that could be taking away from you doing outbound to potential new clients, or sending you more proposals and quotes, or working on an offer or a product or service or an improvement to your existing service, which would be far higher leverage for you to be doing. And beyond that, and this is probably where I can help the most when it comes to time management, is asking yourself, do I have systems in place, or am I purely relying on energy and vibes and motivation to get stuff done? Because often this means that you are not time boxing and managing your diary with the important lever moving, dial moving, accelerating tasks going in there first. So practically have your to-do list written down and then move those across into your diary of when you're going to do them, how you're going to do them, and being strict with that in terms of when that notification pings up in your Outlook or your Google, or it pings up in your phone, or it pings up wherever you're getting prompted by a Notion or whatever tool you're using, or a TickTick. These are all tools that you need to adhere to start to build structure within your diary and allow you to program in the stuff that really does matter. Beyond that, I would also consider, can you outsource some of the tasks either within your business or perhaps more likely within your life that would free up time for you to do more important stuff? So for me, in the past 3-4 years, that's been meal prep with Prep to Plate. They deliver 10 meals every single week. So that means that I do a lot less cooking than I would ever do before. And I still stay on track with my nutrition. It's been cleaning. So I have a weekly clean every single week by a cleaner for the flat. And then for business specifically, it's podcast post-production. It's short form content clips creation. It's sometimes uploading and posting for the podcast, but also to my socials. And with that, you're just filtering for, is the price or the hourly rate that I'm going to pay to outsource this worth it, so that you can focus on doing higher leverage tasks that perhaps only you can execute really well. So meal prep example, £55 a week for 10 meals, no problem at all. More than happy to do that. It saves me 2 hours of prep on a Sunday. It saves me the mental bandwidth thinking what on earth I'm going to eat. £40 a week for a cleaner, small price to pay for my flat to be clean, tidy, look good. And then when it comes to stuff like editing and content creation from my podcast, the agreed rate I've got with my editor is somebody that is way better at that task than me, is like a master of their craft. That's well worth me outsourcing that rather than me trying to get good at CapCut or trying to get good on iMovie. That makes total sense for me to do. And lastly, for those that feel that you're never getting enough done, this is a slightly more holistic lesson or prompt that I got taught by Oliver Burkeman when I interviewed him last year about productivity and time management. He wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks, which if you listen to the episode with Oliver, I'm sure you'll want to read it off the back of that. But you can create a done list. And I would do that rather than a to-do list, have a done list at the end of the day for a full week. And then when you look at that, it can often be reassuring what you've actually achieved in a day and achieved in a week, especially if, like me, you do feel like you're never really on top of everything and you never got everything done. Equally, it can highlight the days where you fell below a reasonable standard, which you want to hold yourself to. And again, I'm going to push you to raise your floor in terms of what you do regularly rather than raise your ceiling on what you do on your best possible days. Because if your lowest, most average or weekday is still pretty strong in terms of output and the done list still looks pretty good, you're going to benefit massively from the compounding of those efforts across time. Question 12, favorite 3 insights from guests so far in 2025. First up, I'm going to go with Craig Ballantyne, known as the world's most disciplined man. And he defined discipline as putting a level 10 effort into your level 10 problem. And that links with what we're talking about there about getting enough done and the task being of high enough leverage. This was a really timely reminder that you should pause and make sure you align your actions and the time that you're spending and making sure that they're in alignment with the goals and the things that really matter. So if, for example, you are really overweight, then your level 10 problem is probably your health, meaning that your level 10 effort should go into your diet and your nutrition. If you are currently working in a job that you hate, your level 10 effort should go into improving your skill set, rewriting your CV, applying for new roles, searching other industries, considering starting a business that allows you to work in that space that you're currently not working within. That is what matters most, and having discipline and alignment with that is something that all of us can benefit from. And it gave me a shake at points as well, because my health and my fitness is in a great position, and for me to maybe allocate a little bit of the time that I spend on my training, if I'm training 6 days a week, that's quite a lot, to maybe doing more of my sales coaching content creation, maybe doing more of my presentation writing, that would be me putting in a level 10 effort into an area that's a bigger problem or a bigger necessity than my health and my fitness, while of course recognizing that health and fitness remains a core for me. The second insight, and this is not a favorite for the nature of what I'm about to say, but it is vitally important that this information is out there, and I'm really proud that it came from the show. But George from the Tin Men shared that 91% of middle-aged men who died by suicide had sought help by the services and the clinicians that we always tell men to turn to. And it's pretty clear at this point that just telling men to open up and talk isn't working. We need other avenues than purely just talking. We need support for action, support for changing in circumstances. And I'll be the first to say I've got many friends who benefited hugely from therapy. It's helped them work out what's going on inside their head. But off the back of that, they've used the discussions and the realignment they've got from the therapist to change their lives in a material way that they can measure. And that for me is at the crux of the problem with treating men like dysfunctional women and just saying you need to just chat about your problems. It's helping them get to the crux of the problems and then realigning them to take action off the back of it. And that was definitely an insight that stuck with me. And I know that the clips that came from that episode have resonated really strongly with people on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And the messages I've had off the back of the conversation with George have been really powerful. So that's definitely an insight that stood out this year. To go a little bit further back in the archive this year, I'm going to go for a more positive one. And that's with Ollie Patrick, who is a physiologist who I interviewed when I was in London during April. And that is low pressure equals low performance, high pressure equals high performance. Recognizing that the stress that we take on is not just necessary, it's vital for us to respond with the actions required to handle it. And it's actually a bit of a privilege to take on a lot of stress and take on a lot of challenge. And I had a post go viral on LinkedIn the other week with some really interesting comments, mostly favorable, but a few wet wipes. And it read like this: what a privilege it is to be exhausted by a challenge you chose yourself. I chose to take on a sales director role with a £2 million target. I chose to produce a weekly podcast at the best level I can. I chose to provide sales coaching to individuals and businesses. I chose to train hard and master my body, pushing hard in all the domains I care about: brain, body, business. Do you understand? To break from reading my own posts, I honestly want you to ask yourself, if you recognize just how fortunate you are that we get to take on the challenges that we get to take on, the stress that we have, the responsibilities that come our way, because that is what life's all about. If we didn't have that, low pressure would equal low performance and a pretty unsatisfactory or unstimulating life. And most people who choose to listen to a show like this one, who dial into these solo episodes, you want to take on something that matters to you And that means coming with that will be an element of pressure, of stress, and responsibility, which you should open your arms to and welcome into your life, because that is what it's all about. It gives us meaning, it gives us purpose, it gives us fulfillment. Otherwise, we would live pretty sad, pretty miserable, pretty depressing lives. 13 is a bit of a philosophical one, so give me a chance to get my teeth around this one. If both lead to the same outcome, is a compulsion to do good as virtuous as an active choice to do good? This was a question I genuinely messaged the listener to ask a little bit more about, just to make sure that I got the right end of the stick. But in short, if a result is the exact same, regardless of the input that went into it, is it worth the same? I would argue that they aren't equal. Outputs absolutely matter and outcomes matter, but if something happens by requirement or it's mandatory, I don't think it's as virtuous. A daft example that might help bring this to life could be that you've been mandated by your employer to stand at the door and hold it open for every staff member and every colleague that comes in on a Friday, and you've to greet them with a coffee. If you don't do it, you're sacked and fined and disciplined. That is a less virtuous act than if you decided one Friday to welcome those same colleagues to the office, you held the door open for them, and you'd asked them all for their coffee order and you brought them all a coffee. I think that while it's the same outcome in terms of people having the door held open for them and getting a coffee, the second, the latter, comes from a better place because you're doing it with active choice. It was you that decided to do it. It wasn't mandatory. You weren't forced to do it. And while compulsion of anything, particularly via law or via fear of the stick rather than the carrot, it can lead to it being habitual and it becoming a social norm, which could be positive. And that definitely is an upside to it. But I would rather somebody did good in life through deliberate action, which they choose to do so freely rather than being forced into doing so. If you're new to the podcast, make sure you've hit the subscribe or the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on so I can keep getting fantastic guests just like this one. Question number 14. How do you track your client conversations and manage multiple ongoing deals at any one time? Do you use any software? For starters, we're in an age where there's so many different tools and things out there that you can use. And I probably use a fraction of the ones that some people would recommend to you. I'm a bit more Billy Basic. So top of my list is probably having all the different emails that I have into folders sorted by client name, sorted by department, project name, or anything that helps me know where to look when I need information on that particular thing. Alongside that, my Outlook diary or my Google Calendar has prompts within it for my activity for that particular client. So whether that's a proposal deadline, whether that's a nudge to follow up and make a phone call, or, and this is a sneaky little hack, even having little bits of information about that customer or that prospect. So for example, if they've recently been on holiday, what football team they support, if they're into golf, if they told you something else personal that you can keep in your locker, which is helpful. And then the last thing when it comes to like data that I'm gathering and how I'm structuring it would be my follow-up emails to any meeting are also really detailed. So they'll have meeting minutes, they'll have agreed actions, and they'll have deadlines to support with me tracking what was said by who, when it was said, and what needs to happen off the back of it. I use a thing called the 2Ds, do and deadline. So at the end of the email, it says who's doing what and when they're doing it for. And that definitely keeps track of different client conversations and the different deals that are juggling at any one time. In terms of more advanced software, 2 roles that I've worked within, I've had Monday.com and one has had Salesforce, and they were both good CRM systems. And there's also one called Go Higher Level, which 2 of my sales coaching clients have got integrated into their business. So I am familiar with how to integrate with some of those best practices, and that can be a great way to automate some of your workflow as well. The other one that I have seen, albeit I've only worked with this client for 1 session, so I've not really been into their CRM a lot, is one called SalesLoft, and that seems reasonable too. But ultimately, in terms of tracking client conversations, detailed emails, diary and calendar management, and then a personalized, basically your own CRM or note-taking system which supports what you know about that person, what you can leverage about your relationship with them. That'll help you. Question 15. Do you ever feel like you've peaked after an episode or even a deal that you've done? I'm not sure how I can beat something I've just done in the future. It's perfectly natural to be a little bit intimidated by something you've achieved because you know how hard it is to get to the next level. And cards on the table, there's been certain episodes or particular deals I've done where there's a weird mixture of pride and satisfaction at a job well done, but also an embracing of pressure to be like, oh, the money's come in, or the recording's done, or the stats are looking amazing on YouTube or Spotify. And you're thinking, is that the absolute best I'm ever going to be able to do? When will I be able to get to that level again? And shit, now that's what I've got to beat. We always adapt to our new baseline though. And I think when we achieve new ceilings, we want to make sure that we raise the floor of what we typically do as well as the ceiling. And perhaps more helpfully than just talking about podcasting, because very few of us want to start a podcast, I would advocate for understanding that feeling of you having peaked is coming from you attaching things to the external highs. So it might be things like downloads or revenue or praise or social proof or just general hype around what you've just done. But those are all byproducts, not the fuel that needs to keep you going. And I've done deals and I've done pods that have looked pretty average, maybe on paper or on the screen, but I knew that they were aligned, they were strategic, they were meaningful. And there's definitely episodes in the archive where they've maybe got 20% of the plays of some of the top performers in the top episodes, but I still enjoyed creating them. I know somebody will probably message me at some point on Instagram or LinkedIn and say, really enjoyed that episode with such and such, and I learned X, Y, and Z. So the impact is still there, even if it's not on the same scale or the same volume. And even beyond that, process-wise, I enjoyed prepping for that podcast. The research that I did for that guest or that topic, it forced me to develop and learn. And that's worth something. There's an intangible value to that. In terms of like highs on the podcast, there's an episode that I did last summer with The Critical Drinker, who's a big Scottish YouTuber who does film critiques. It's got over 75,000 plays on YouTube. And I have genuinely no idea when I'm next going to see that level of plays in a video. And that was July last year, over a year ago. I've not let it stop me from creating episodes every single week that I'm still pleased with. They serve my audience. They support the demographic of type of people who listen to this. And while I love the high of that particular achievement, I do keep repeating the process, which I enjoy and I know brings me purpose and fulfillment over and over and over again. And in itself, the secret is to enjoy that. Okay, question 16. Rewind. Would you go to university again, or would you do things differently this time? For those that are new or haven't heard me talk about this before, I went and studied in 2010 to 2014 at University of Glasgow and did a master's in politics and social sciences. And I would probably go to university again because at 17, I was pretty inexperienced, as we all are. And I definitely gained skills where I could take vast amounts of information and distill it down into an argument or a coherent message. And that served me well across lots of things. There was lots of formative experiences with the university, so arguing in tutorial rooms about different things. Just generally growing up. I mean, going at 17, you break so much ground, whether it's the first time you go out till 4 a.m. and come home and been sick in a taxi, or whether it's you... Again, you don't have to be at university to do that, but that was probably the case for me. Whether it's you, I don't know, genuinely, I found that going to university was a period for me growing up and maturing. Would I go to university again? Probably, because it enabled me to learn quite a lot about myself and put me in new environments, meet lots of new people. But I don't think it was the be all and the end all. I think if I was to do a different degree, I would definitely do politics as part of my honours, but I would probably do something business or finance related alongside, because while I'm not naturally predisposed that way, I know how valuable that information would have been. I would also recognise, and I would try and go back in time and shake myself, that you have way more time at university than you actually assume that you do, because I think in my final year, in fourth year, doing my dissertation and 2 modules in second semester, I had 4 hours of contact time a week. Now, there was loads of reading to do around that, so you could turn up and actually contribute to the seminar, and some of the tutors were actually really good at pushing you to do the reading. But I would have liked to have done stuff on the side or worked in maybe more sales roles full-time rather than just in my summer job. And that would have been better. And podcasts weren't around then, but I wish I'd maybe started a blog or something more focused that was a creative outlet for me alongside university. Question 17, there's been a few questions around this, so I've collated it into just one, but basically the general theme is what's my predictions for Rangers under Russell Martin? And at the time of recording, I was at the first game back last night, which was against Panathinaikos in the Champions League qualifier. Rangers won 2-0. Russell Martin's got to be given time. It's new owners, it's a new structure, it's a new vibe, a new era for the club, and you're not going to reverse the dominance that Celtic have had instantly, so you need to back somebody that's a little bit more of a project where he's going to try and do things differently. He's going to restructure things. He's going to bring in new players. He's going to bring in a new system. He's going to try and get them to play how he wants them to play, and there's going to be trading and selling of players as they develop and grow. There's going to be growth from the youth department, hopefully, because that facility at Auchenpowie has been criminally underutilised in my opinion. But ultimately, I think this season will be one of transition. But unlike last season when the board said it was going to be a season transition, I think this will be a transition towards an improved Rangers, a better Rangers. But across that time, I really hope that we qualify either for the Champions League or at worst Europa League group stages, and that we challenge really strongly in the league with Celtic and please win one of the cups. So that would be important. Hopefully the Scottish Cup, because I think the League Cup Rangers have won lots and lots of times. The Scottish Cup less so in my lifetime anyway. Question 18, you said about being calm when asking for a 25k deposit, a 250k deposit. How did you manage this? I would love your advice here. It's something I stall on. First of all, you don't want to stall on asking for a deposit from your clients. That's really important that you get paid. And for those that haven't heard the episode yet, definitely go back and listen to 319, which was just recently talking about sales and communication skills. This is quite a well-timed question because next Monday, the day after this episode comes out, the client I'm working with for my next Sales Level Up workshop wants me to support his staff who are asking for really high value orders and trying to get them more comfortable with discussing large sums of money. So I have some immediate frameworks that I can share with you, and I'll give you a couple of them just now and one mindset anchor for free to get started. The first thing to recognize is that price is only daunting in a vacuum. By that I mean, when you land your price, you want to relate it to the outcomes and the after impact of your product or service before you mention the price. When you land it, frame it with the value around it and beforehand, and then you simply say whatever the value is, and then you say, to get started and work together, please make the deposit of 250k today, share the remittance advice, and then we'll get, and then whatever the delivery date is booked in or whatever the next step is. After you've landed that, you must breathe and pause. Don't start rambling afterwards. That underlines your discomfort. You need to portray the 4 C's when you land any price or any request for payment. Confidence, calm, competence that you're good at what you do, and commitment that you're going to make the deal happen. The mindset frame that I think will be helpful is just understanding that this purchase that you're asking the customer to make is a choice that they are making. They will have some sort of budget for this purchase of the product or service that you're selling, and it's likely to be a number that they themselves have some comfort on spending. If it's not you, or if it's not your company, they will spend it with somebody else. If you personally have pride or you have faith in the work and the quality of what you sell, it's your personal responsibility for them to choose you and spend the money with you rather than another supplier. If not you, then who? I would rather they choose me than somebody who probably won't fulfill the requirements to the same quality that I'm planning on doing so and won't have the same positive impact. So don't land the price in a vacuum, and make sure that you recognize that the customer is probably comfortable spending this money. They're going to spend it with somebody. It might as well be you. Question 19, and we're in the home straight now. 3 reasons why you think most podcasts fail to hit the ground running, and how would you prevent this? First things first, they have no clear concept or positioning of what they're going to be speaking about for 10, 20, 30, 40 episodes in advance. They don't really know who their ideal listener profile is, because if you shoot at everything, you'll probably hit nothing. So having a really clear idea on what I'm likely to be speaking about, what most episodes are going to cover in terms of topics, and who do I expect to listen to this off the back of it. Secondly, having a really clear understanding of what you want from the show off the back of it. So if you're launching a show, do you want to improve your personal brand? Do you want to just create more content? Do you want a better network, whether that's guests or listeners? Do you want to generate sales for your business or inquiries for the service that you sell? Having that understanding and that underpinning will help you to push through the weeks when maybe the downloads are down or a guest cancelled on you or something went wrong, and it will keep you going, because the vast majority of podcasts fail at episode 3 or episode 21 or before either of those milestones. So making sure that you have a bit of a why in the background of what on earth you want to do it for. And the third one, much like I was talking about when it came to time management and productivity, is if you have weak systems for things like your guest outreach or your research for your questions or recording regularly on a weekly or batch recording a monthly basis, or whether you're editing and your production you're uploading, if you don't have a pretty standard operating procedure on how you execute those, and you don't have some templates in place that you can copy and paste or use over and over again, you're doomed to fail, because you're going to be really inconsistent if you can't rely on solid systems. Now, I teach all of this on a full video course that I did last year called mypodcastmasterclass.thinkific.com. And excitingly, there's more than 10 shows that's launched off the back of that. And one of them is a chap called Stephen Pettigrew, a great guy, moved out to Dubai recently with his family and his business. And Stephen really got the first 3 of those things in place. He had a really clear concept for who he was wanting to speak to in the core topics. He was really clear on what he wanted from the show in terms of his personal brand and his network, and then what that would lead to in terms of his business opportunities. And third, I gave him all my systems, which I run this show with. So it's a sure thing. So yeah, that if you're really interested in podcasting, that's where to go. Question 20, we're almost wrapped up, 2 to go. Not necessarily a deep question for you like you normally answer, but 2 things I want to ask. Would you consider doing more solos, as I've binged them all so far, including all the way back to 2020, and I've also found a load of guest appearances you've done too. Second question within this, can you do more of these, and what helped you speak so well for long periods as a monologue? First things first, more solos. 2 in a row have just been solo, so 319 and 320, which this is, have been 1 in solo sales and 1 solo Q&A, so I am trying to do plenty of them for you. If there's particular topics you want me to get into, absolutely willing to do more solos, happy to do those. So I do the birthday solos every year, I do a sales solo, and then I do the solo Q&As every 10, so I feel that's a reasonable types of topics for me to get into. But if you think there's glaring things that I need to do, that need to talk about, you'd love to hear just me speak about, then absolutely open to those suggestions. So do fire those on LinkedIn or on Instagram. And in terms of me being able to speak well for long periods, 1, practice. 2, it was practice both for podcasting, but also within my sales roles and the work that I've done in that space. I'm also an avid consumer of communication skills and coaching content. I had Shackle Walkman on the show when the last Dubai tour. It's something like episode 305 or 304, somewhere around there. He's somebody I watch a lot of. I watch a guy called Vin Yang on YouTube as well, and I take a lot of different techniques from there. I also now am teaching some of the guys that I work with who've got a public speaking or a presenting element or a pitching element to their sales role to do the same. So by me teaching on to others, it's helping me relearn some of the lessons which have helped me. And the last thing when it comes to the solo episodes is I do have notes and I do have prompts in front of me which help me to do that, and getting really good at having short, sharp prompts and knowing roughly what I want to speak about joins the dots a lot between this being a fluid episode or me doing lots of ums and ehs and not being sure what I'm going to say next. So practice, consumption of frameworks and advice which I action regularly, and also a little bit of preparation so that when I do sit down in front of the mic, when I do sit down in front of the camera, I have a good idea of where I'm going to go with it. And that definitely helps me to do that. Question 21 and final one for us to finish on. 1 quote you refer back to on occasion for inspiration. I'll give you 2 because they're both related and I think they'll definitely both serve you. If one doesn't resonate, the other one will. Today I will do what others will not, so tomorrow I can do what others cannot. And that's from Jerry Rice, an American football player. And I first wrote that down in the summer of 2009 when I just finished the rugby season, and I was a bit of a late bloomer in terms of size and development. And I definitely felt like I was a little bit skinny and I wasn't really playing as well in the team as I wanted to. I wasn't really contributing. I wasn't getting picked for the district team beyond my club team. And that summer, I wrote that down on my dad's computer and printed it off and kept it in my room. And that was encouraging me to train hard, push my body, to eat. I was a pretty hard gainer at that age as well, so it was encouraging me to actually eat more. And that was something that stayed with me from a fitness and a wellness perspective, that if I would do things that others won't do through choice early on, in the future I'll be able to do things that others can't through ability. And that's definitely the case in fitness and health. It's 100% the case in sales. It's 100% the case with the podcast as well. So if I'm somebody that will show up and do the things that I decided I'm going to do on that day, on that time, in the future, people who want to do the same as that will not be capable of doing so because they've not put in the work behind the scenes. And that inspires me to take regular positive daily actions. And the second one, and the reason I mentioned this is I genuinely heard it on the train on the way in, and it was from a guy called Jack Butcher. And he wrote, "It's a beautiful day to remember that the second order effects of what you're doing now will arrive much later." That encourages you to understand that there's a delayed time frame on the benefits of what you're doing now, whether that's the sales cold outreach you're doing, whether that's improving your communication skills through a course or a coach, whether that's going for the walk after your dinner to help with your digestion so you have a better night's sleep, whether that's meal prepping or ordering meal prep on a Sunday so that it arrives on the Monday. These are all things that pay off down the line. And it could be much later, it could be just a little bit later, but doing things today which serve you tomorrow, and that whole concept of the 24-hour you, what would you tomorrow thank yourself for doing for today, is quite an inspiring framework to help you take action. So if you're stalling or fumbling over a decision or taking some sort of positive step in your life, that can be a really, really helpful way to do it. So that is a wrap for another solo Q&A. 21 questions answered. Hopefully a wide range of stuff that you've enjoyed. The show's in a great position just now. I'm so grateful for all your support. Do all that good stuff. Leave a rating on Spotify, share it to your Instagram story, put it into the group chat with some guys or girls that you think should listen to the show, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.